Mastering the intervals is one of the most important aspects of learning music. In this video, we will explain to you the traditional theoretical aspects of their presentation. What is an interval? An interval represents a distance separating two sounds based at different pitches of the musical sphere. In order to differentiate these intervals and classify their distances, our brain requires a graduation tool. In the history of tonal music, the major scale was imposed over time as the foundation on which the theory was constructed. It is therefore on the major diatonic scale, made up of tones and semitones and containing a series of 7 degrees, that all music terminology lies. In order to be completely mastered, the interval must be viewed through these 3 aspects. Horizontally, which is to say in its melodic dimension, where the two sounds are played one after the other. It is called ascending when it ascends to a high pitch. It is called descending when it descends to a low pitch. An interval can also be perceived vertically, that is to say, when the two sounds are played simultaneously. We call this a harmonic interval. It is also possible to represent an interval as a distance in tones. For this, we use the successive semitones scale of the chromatic scale. But let's look now at how these intervals were named. The interval between the first degree and the second degree of the major scale is called major second. This interval has a distance of 1 tone. It is important to understand that this term, second major, hereafter takes on a generic usage and will describe all intervals with a distance of 1 tone. In general, the role of the qualitative minor will be to lower the major interval by a semitone. Consequently, the interval between first degree and flat second degree is called minor second. This interval has a distance of 1 semitone. Here again, the term minor second will be used generically and describes every interval that has a distance of a semitone. The interval between the first degree and third degree is called major third. This interval has a distance of 2 tones. The interval between the first degree and flat third degree is logically called minor third. This interval has a distance of 1.5 tones. The interval between the first degree and the fourth degree is simply called fourth. This interval has a distance of 2.5 tones. The interval between the first degree and the fifth degree is called fifth. This interval has a distance of 3.5 tones. The term fifth will also describe every interval with a distance of 3.5 tones. Between the fourth and the fifth, there is a singular interval that is called the tritone. The tritone has the particularity of dividing the octave into 2 intervals equaling 3 tones. We'll come back to this. The interval between the first degree and the sixth degree is called major sixth. This interval has a distance of 4.5 tones. The interval between the first degree and the flat sixth degree is called minor sixth. This interval has a distance of 4 tones. The interval between the first degree and the seventh degree is called major seventh. This interval has a distance of 5.5 tones. The interval between the first degree and the flat seventh degree is called minor seventh. This interval has a distance of 5 tones. And finally, the interval between the first degree and the eighth degree is, as you know, called an octave. The interval has a distance of 6 tones. Make sure not to confuse the distance of the octave interval, equal to 6 tones, with the graduation in 7 degrees idea of the major scale. We will now proceed to analyze the fragment of a melody in order to better understand the usage of these terms. Listen to this short extract from the theme Over the Rainbow, sung a cappella.
Somewhere over the rainbow.
The melodic line will describe a relief in the musical sphere based on a number of precise notes. The melody of Over the Rainbow is part of a rhythmic framework and part of the range of the major scale. However, in order to properly assign this melody to a scale, we need to be able to identify which sound corresponds to the first degree, called the tonic. We are going to identify the intervals separating each note of the melody. Between the first and the second note, there is an ascending octave interval. Between the second and the third note, there is a descending minor second interval. Between the third and the fourth note, there is a descending major third interval. Between the fourth and the fifth note, there is an ascending major second interval. Between the fifth and the sixth note, there is an ascending major second interval too. Between the seventh and the eighth note, there is an ascending minor second interval. We can internalize a melody in multiple ways. First, by its spontaneous recall, but we can also observe it as a series of intervals and the distance between each note as we have just done. A melody can also be seen as a series of successive degrees in reference to the major scale. We can associate names of notes based on one of the first major scales possible to every degree of this melody. What you must remember is, we can present an interval in a functional way across the tonal perception of every degree. The same interval has multiple representations in names of notes because there are 12 major scales. Finally, we give a generic name to each interval which corresponds to the distance in tones. These last 3 points consist of analytical understanding and are relatively easy to master, but they first need to be nourished and motivated by the development of your sensory and emotional perception. Our platform Meludia was designed in order to allow you to access this style of perception with ease.